So yesterday we discussed the surprise end to the Oculus versus Zenimax lawsuit, which of course ended in a rather nice payout for Zenimax. Of course, there are still appeals and more appeals to come before they actually get that money, but the ruling was still in their favour for breaking of the NDA and a couple of other bits. If you want to know the full details of the ruling, do check out my video from yesterday. Today's video is about some comments from the Oculus CTO, who of course is none other than John Carmack, and he wrote a rather lengthy statement against the whole court case and the ruling itself, and he's not best pleased, let's just leave it at that. Now, he wrote a really lengthy post on Facebook. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I'll be here till next Christmas, but of course there will be a link in the description if you want to give it a read. I suggest you do. There's some interesting stuff here, but I want to cover the most pertinent parts, and he says, quotes, "The Zenimax versus trial is over. I disagree with their characterization, misdirection and selective omissions. I never tried to hide or wipe any evidence, and all of my data is accounted for, contrary to some stories being spread. The exception was the plaintiff's expert that said Oculus's implementations of the techniques at issue were non-literally copied from the source code I wrote while at id Software. This is just not true. The authors at Oculus never had access to the id C++ VR code, only a tiny bit of plain text shader code from the demo. I was genuinely interested in hearing how the paid expert would spin a web of code DNA between completely unrelated code bases." The analogy that the expert gave to the jury was that if someone wrote a book that was basically Harry Potter with the names changed, it would still be copyright infringement. I agree, that is the literary equivalent of changing invariable names when you copy source code. However, if you abstract Harry Potter up a notch or two, you get Campbell's Hero's Journey, which is also maps well onto Star Wars and hundreds of other stories. These are not copyright infringement. Notably, I wasn't allowed to read the full expert report, only listen to him in trial, and even his expert testimony in trial is under seal, rather than the public record. This is surely intentional. If the code examples were released publicly, the internet would have viciously mocked the analysis. I still have a morbid level of curiosity about the several hundred-page report. As I said, that's only a small sampling of what John Carmack had to say, and as I said, he takes issue with a lot of Zenimax's witnesses and expert opinions and so on, and calls into question the ruling and the techniques they used to reach that ruling with the jury. However, Zenimax aren't exactly going to take this lying down, and after Carmack's speech on Facebook was published by Gamasutra, Zenimax apparently caught wind of it and decided that they weren't going to let him say that without them getting a shot off as well. And a spokesperson said, quote, "In addition to expert testimony finding both literal and non-literal copying, Oculus programmers themselves admitted using Zenimax's copyrighted code, one saying he cut and pasted it into the Oculus SDK. And Brendan Arib, who is Oculus VR co-founder, in writing requested a license for the source code shared by Carmack they needed for the Oculus Rift. Not surprisingly, the jury found Zenimax code copyrights were infringed. The Oculus Rift was built on a foundation of Zenimax technology. As for the denial of wiping, the court's independent expert found 92% of Carmack's hard drive was wiped, all data was permanently destroyed right after Carmack got notice of the lawsuit, and that his affidavit denying the wiping was false. Those are the hard facts." Now, I do have a few questions about all of this. Now, obviously, we probably won't know because, as Carmack pointed out, the statement from the expert witness is under seal, and we won't know exactly the methodology that he used or what he actually said or anything like that. But my questions are 92% of what? 92% of the hard drive, 92% of the data on the hard drive. You know, if the hard drive was 50% full and 92% of that was wiped, obviously it's not 92% of the hard drive. Or, you know, if it was 92% of a 1 terabyte or whatever, then obviously the disk is mostly empty. You kind of get where I'm going with this, but let's assume that, you know, it was the data that they're talking about here, you know. Let's assume that you can figure out somehow that 92% of data was deleted. And that's a very specific number, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. That seems kind of skeptical to me, but, you know, I'm not an expert, so let's just leave that to the side for the minute. You don't know what that data was unless you have a clone of the hard drive. And if they had a clone of the hard drive, they'd be like, here's Exhibit A of him stealing the thing or whatever. You know, for all they know, it was 400 gigabytes of photos of his dog. kind of get what I'm saying. They don't know what the data was, even if they can prove that that much data was deleted at a certain time. There's no way to prove that the data contained this code that they're alleging he stole. So, again, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm just throwing out there that this sounds a bit like a tall order, but again, without knowing exactly what the expert witness said, it's hard to really get down into the meat of his argument and to what he actually said and methodology and all that. So it's tough to say, but I'm skeptical. Let's just leave it at that, shall we? Now, as I've said before, I've always been a little skeptical of Zenimax's argument because, you know, this all started after Oculus was actually successful, and after, of course, you know, they got all them Facebook dollars, you know, 2 billion of them, as far as I recall. And, you know, that does make them seem like they're just chasing that Facebook money. And, you know, this is John Carmack we're talking about as well here. You do have to consider that. And lastly, let's just say that this happened as they said, and Brendan and Reeb requested a license for this source code. Okay, so John Carmack's able to rewrite an entire game engine, but he can't rewrite to this code to the point where it can't be traced back to you? Okay, alright then. With all that said, this court case isn't over. You know, it technically is, but appeals and appeals and appeals and more comments like these are probably going to be in our future, so it's definitely going to be an interesting time. What's that old saying? May you live in interesting times, and someone definitely said that to Zenimax and Oculus, I believe. Regardless, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.